Hey, friends, I'm introducing today's episode from beautiful Toronto, Ontario, Canada. The CN Tower is around here somewhere, but the sun is too bright to see it through the phone. So today's guest is a familiar face. I have Carson Hill back on the show, but we're not talking about tattoo machines. This time we are talking about the tattoo industry and the idea that tattooers have sort of lost control of the industry in some ways, particularly when it comes to manufacturers and suppliers. We have a lot of big players, a lot of big corporations with a lot of money who have made their way into the industry and are supplying us with our goods. So it was a fun episode. It was a fun discussion, and I'll keep it short because I need to get on a flight. So I hope you enjoy it, and I'll talk to you at the end. The kind of the topic of conversation is when you reached out is tattooers losing control of the industry. And I think, obviously that's been happening for a while, but it's really flown under the radar until very recently for a lot of tattooers. I guess my first question is, what prompted you to reach out with the subject matter?
Well, actually, it was one of my customers who has brought it up to me multiple times, and it's obviously something that I'm aware of, and have even had conversations with other business owners in the industry and stuff. So, and it is more for me. It's more like, like there's two ways you could look at it. There's support tattooer owned businesses is one lens, and I think that would probably be the lens that I choose to look at it through. And then there's the other side, which is like, almost like the corporatization of tattooing at large or as an industry, and sort of the same way that you saw several decades ago big box companies kind of come in and drown out smaller businesses around the world, really. But obviously, like, for example, like a Home Depot or like a Walmart or something like that, which comes along, and you see some of the downsides of that, and product quality and customer relations and stuff like that. And you're seeing that happen in the industry, and I think that it surprises me how few people in the industry are aware of that. And I think that it's just an important conversation to have, because a lot of us get into tattooing to sort of escape that sort of corporate world vibe. We want to do our own thing, and we want to go against the grain, let's say. And I can't speak for everybody, but I think a lot of people probably do kind of want to just get away from corporate. Well, I was going to say America, but I think it's worldwide, really. And just do your own thing. And I think that it's important for us to know where that's happening, and maybe if we do want to control our own industry to some degree, the information is going to be key.
Mm-hmm. So this stuff started, several years back, and I know the first one that I was aware of was Bunker Hill Capital or Nexus Group, I guess, which ended up purchasing both Kingpin, Tatsoul, and maybe others. And I guess there are a couple of big groups now that own, kind of the vast majority of tattoos supply and distributorships. And I remember when that was happening, it was introduced to me by, I forget who, but whoever it was, it was Sean Bellina, said that Nexus Group had, the reason that started happening to the tattoo industry was that it had hit an annual revenue as an industry that some of these funds will look for. And that particular company that ended up buying Kingpin and Tatsoul came from the aftermarket automotive industry. So they were already in kind of the edge type of industry where, like, people who are souping up Honda Civics or Supras or whatever else, that they would buy small companies that were doing aftermarket parts and then basically make them more efficient, more effective, and then sell them off. I don't know that for a fact. That was just what was relayed to me. And he was like, and tattooing is that. So they're kind of looking at those edge style industries anyways. And then they recognize that, they've hit $2 billion a year in revenue, $5 billion a year in revenue, and it hits all of their metrics. And they say, okay, let's go in and buy up and see what we can do. So if we look at what's happened, if you buy from Kingpin, if you buy from Tatsol, I guess my question is, what have we noticed that's changed? Maybe in the last, when was that? Maybe 5 years ago, tops?
I think it's coming up on 10 almost.
Oh, okay.
Maybe it's
Okay.
more like 8 to 10, something like that.
Yeah. I just wonder, we have some, so I guess there are a couple of different discussions to have. One is kind of from a the principle based like thing, and other is like from a business standpoint, did things get more expensive, less expensive? Did you get stuff faster, slower? What was the customer experience like after that transition, better or worse?
Yeah, and I can't speak for everyone. I mean, I do relate with customers a lot, and so I have heard other people's experiences as well. From my perspective, so Kingpin, I've been looking at it through the lens more of like manufacturers rather than distributors. So what I notice is, well, first of all, I would start by saying, like, a lot of these companies were started by tattoo artists originally and then were sold. There were some companies that don't fall into that category, and they were started by people that were not related to the industry at all. But in many cases that they were sold. And I would say from both ends of the discussion, like the people who sold the companies and the companies who bought the companies that were sold, from a business standpoint, it all makes perfect sense. And I have no intention of like hating on anybody for the choices that they made and stuff like that. It's really just, it's a matter of having the discussion with the industry that doesn't seem to be aware of it. And so back to the manufacturing, what I have noticed as far as changes go is, so typically what they're going to do is they're going to start looking for cost reductions, and so the quality of the products will be reduced. You're going to have customer interaction, and service is a big one. I think people have complained to me about that most often. They get surprised when they get prompt service, and that's a testimonial to what they're used to receiving. There's no longer a technical support for a lot of these big companies. That's just, the company is, and it's not just those two that you mentioned, that they're in that same like chunk. I think it's more like 10 or 12 really big companies, and I don't really want to go listing names, but so let's say you buy a tattoo machine and you have some kind of a technical question or issue, something like that. To get somebody on the phone is almost impossible, if not impossible. You're not going to get an industry expert on the phone. If you do get anybody on the phone, it's just going to be some kind of a rep who has, a checklist to go through with you and something like that, Or like as a potential buyer, like good luck calling one of these big companies and asking a bunch of questions to try and establish whether or not this is the choice for you or something like that. So there's that. There's also the big one, in my opinion, is going to be the innovation. Innovation is last in line, unfortunately. And so what I see is, let's say 10 or 12 or 15 or so different tattoo machines that are using the same exact motor and the same drive bar, the same basic function of the tattoo machine in 10 or 15 different ergonomic packages. And then what they will do is they'll put in features that, differentiate them from other machines. But in my experience or my opinion, what I think of those innovations or features is more a marketing play than anything else. It's not really bringing some real value to the product. We're still talking about an angle drive rotary machine that's been around since the 1800s. Nothing fundamental has changed about it. It's just, how did they lay it out? How big is the motor? And a lot of them, what they do is they're putting like a little tiny flat motor inside a big tube, and they all just kind of, like, it all started with Cheyenne, really, and then a lot of companies came along and started copying that layout, and now that's predominantly, it's almost 100% that way. So, so from my perspective, that's one of the big prices that we pay by allowing the industry to go in that direction, is that innovation is lost. And then you do have companies that will come along and have innovation to offer, but they end up getting overshadowed by these enormous companies that, like you said, they're basically branding agencies for other industries. And I've heard, I don't know either, but I've heard rumors that there's companies that sell dog hair clippers as well as motorcycle parts and car parts and tattoo machines. And there's nothing wrong with that from a business standpoint, but because we care about our industry so much and we want to see it tailored to our needs or desires, then those are getting lost along the way.
Yeah, I definitely I agree, and especially to kind of reiterate that point of innovation and it being last in line. Whenever you are dealing with a company that maybe has bought, let's use Numa as an example. You're a longtime tattooer. You're you're kind of you have an engineering mind. It was a very specific set of capabilities and interests and things that led you to do this thing. And let's say it grows up and then one of these companies buys it up. They missed all of that stuff. Like there's no one there that did any of that. So it's not like that innovation's just last in line. They don't even have an innovator on board. Like if it were, it would take an uprising of Numa clients to come back and go like, man, these machines have gone to shit. They're terrible now. You've got to do something about it. It would take a lot of people doing that for them to actually even take the time to bring you back on board or to find someone with your skill set to come back. So really the business model itself is so different from from where it started in a lot of these cases that it's pretty much hopeless for it to go backwards.
Yeah, because they like what you're saying is that there aren't industry experts on board, and that is so important when it comes to innovation. So then they're just repeating themselves. I call it same-o. It's the same-o machine that you see time and time again. And I don't know why they show us, because if it were me and I was in that boat, I wouldn't be showing the like X-ray of what's going on inside the machine, because all that does is show me, oh, it's the same as this last 25 machines that I've looked at. The same exact motor and everything. And I have a relationship with some motor manufacturers also, and they're telling me the same thing. That it's not just that I'm guessing. Like I know what some of these companies are purchasing in terms of motors, and it's like one company might have 5-6 different machines, but it's every single one of them using the same motor, same drive. So it's just a matter of like how big is the battery, or what kind of features are you getting, like give versus electric give versus, and again, I think that's mostly a marketing play. Because like, how many people do you know that are like swear by electric give? It's like, well, it's really more of it's a tool to get me to buy it. Like, ooh, that's cool. Like dazzle me. And then I start using it, and then it's like, I don't really mess with that feature anymore. It's like, it's cool. It's there. I would say that the one thing that people probably end up liking sustainably is like Bluetooth stuff, like wireless foot pedal and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I find particularly on the machine side is that if there is any type of innovation, it is it's something shiny. It's a trick. It's an LED screen. It's a light bar that changes colors. It's a mobile app, that allows you to do something. It's rarely something that affects how needles penetrate skin. Yeah. So, but really, this might be a question more or less about tattooer-owned companies and just about the kind of like, one, the size of the company, and two, kind of their purpose, because I've always kind of pushed back a little bit on the for tattooers by tattooers, just because I've always had the idea that, like, I don't know, like, if it takes so much effort for me to be good at tattooing, I don't know that I could be very competent at mixing inks, or at manufacturing the plastics for cartridges, or a lot of other things. I might prefer someone that specializes in those things to build those products for me to use as a tattooer. It's like, there's a saying that's like, probably the worst person to start a plumbing company is a plumber, because they're too tied to the technician piece of the puzzle, and they don't know anything about running a business. You might somewhat want someone who's more process oriented and customer service focused and things like that, and they can hire great plumbers, but maybe the plumber shouldn't own the place. And I kind of adopt that mindset a little bit with tattooing and tattooers as well. Maybe a tattooer shouldn't open a tattoo shop. Not that they shouldn't, but maybe they're not always. Maybe just because you're a great tattooer does not make you a great shop owner. In fact, it might be a detriment.
Yeah, I understand that mentality. I think that the piece that's missing, or the thing that comes up for me, is the passion behind it, right?
Right.
So picture like a tattoo artist or somebody who's very passionate about tattooing or tattoos, right? Or even art, compared to like a board of individuals that are just strictly businessmen, right? So for example, you're probably right that the board is probably more capable of producing $1 billion business, because we see that. However, when it comes to like providing the guts or like the spirit behind it all, that gets lost. And I think, so did you hear about that convention that happened up north? I don't want to mention specifically, but there was a convention that happened somewhere in the Pacific Northwest where it was put on by a non-tattoo related person, just, trying to get into the industry. And people showed up. They started doing their convention. The guy who put this thing together, he ultimately only planned it for Friday, and so all these tattooers at like midnight or 2:00 in the morning start getting text messages on Friday. Come get your shit. Get off the floor. The hotel is not booked you for the whole weekend.
Oh, wow.
And they had paid, $750 for a booth or whatever it was, and it's just nothing. Too bad. So, so my point is that like when it gets difficult, because it's not easy, I don't think, to put on a convention that is successful, right? So when it gets difficult, the thing that drives the successful guy, like for example, Derb, right? He puts on a great show. What drives him to complete it successfully is the passion that he has for the industry. And without that, I think that, I don't know, it just seems like that was a requirement in order to produce something of value and bring something valuable to the industry,
Hey, I completely agree. I think that's the differentiator, someone who cares about the industry, who understands the industry. Derb, is a tattooer, but has not been known as a tattooer for probably 15 years or more. I don't even know the last time he did a tattoo.
Yeah.
But he has a real sense of like commitment and responsibility towards the artists that he goes. They're all his friends. Everybody knows Derb, and he knows them, and he wants to make sure they have a great experience. And also he wants to make sure that the people who've come to Hell City for 20 plus years know what to expect from a collector's standpoint. And that comes from the passion for the industry. And I've never been to some of the big traveling shows. I've never been to like a villain art show or anything like that. So I don't really know the differences, although I guess the villain art shows are run by tattooers as well. But the shows that are, that are happening month in, month out, that are just kind of machines that keep kind of rolling by, I would assume that they don't have the same type of, it's not the same type of experience as what you would get at a Derb show.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to comment on that specific show or anything like that. But yeah, I would say that there are certain shows that don't seem to have that. That's just kind of like get them in and get them out. It's like kind of like the difference between some shows where it's invite, right, and other shows where just anybody comes in and sets up, and it's maybe in some ways discriminatory, which isn't the coolest thing in the world, but it ends up kind of producing a more quality event.
Right. Yeah, I agree. That might be a whole different conversation. I certainly didn't mean to call out Villain Arts. That's just one of the big shows that I could think of. I don't know. I've never met the guy who runs it, and I don't know much about the shows. But yeah, I think you can probably just go in and get a booth if you're licensed. And a show like that might bring shows to parts of the country that might not get them otherwise. Like there's no show in Memphis, Tennessee here, but that's certainly an outfit that could put one together here and probably make it successful. They have enough, the processes and money behind them to do it. So, yeah. Well, back to you're talking about us allowing, these types of things to happen. I guess as far as big companies coming in and buying up and taking control of the tattoo industry, outside of being aware of it, I don't know what we do. Do you stop buying, on principle? Do you stop buying from your supplier? Or you just make an effort to support, the smaller, craftsperson?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a personal choice for sure. I think that the voting with your dollars kind of comes to mind. It's like we can't just stop them. So maybe allowing isn't the right word, but support. Like that's why I started off with the thought that it's not so much about saying what's wrong with the industry or who's like hating on anybody specifically, but maybe it's more about noticing some of these other companies that do support. It's almost like support local, but rather than supporting local, it's more like supporting almost like the family. It's keeping it in the family kind of thing.
Yeah. The one thing that is good. I'm proud of the way the industry has grown over the last couple of decades, and it's exciting to know that we have built this thing to a point that big investment funds and things like that recognize the industry as being successful. And I think that if I look back 25 years, the number of products that I bought that were designed for tattooing were not very many. Basically, the inks, the machines, and the needles. Everything else I used was repurposed from other industries. And it is cool that now we have a lot of innovation, little dip cap sponges that can clean my needles, tattoo machines that I can change out cams and get different, profiles that I couldn't have. That kind of thing didn't happen, back then. Soaps and, topicals that are tattoo specific and designed for our industry. All that stuff it's exciting that we've brought it that far. So it's certainly not, overall a bad thing. I think a lot of times when people romanticize tattooing in the 80s and 90s or whatever, they either weren't a part of it or they are thinking of it a lot more fondly. The thinking it was a lot greater than it actually was.
Well, okay. So if you look at you make a good point, and I agree. I think that the thing to notice is the thing that I notice is that innovation doesn't come from these big corporate entities, right? The innovation is actually still coming. It reminds me a little bit of like public versus private, like government related, right? So governments don't innovate. Private industries innovate and then governments adapt, right? And it's similar in that way. Like these big companies are not the government of tattooing or anything like that, but so for example, the ink cap that you were describing, or like there's products that are making our practice better. The ideas and the innovation is still coming from individuals who have their hand on the pulse, their finger on the pulse of the industry, who are tattooers or who know tattooing very intricately. These are still the experts of the industry producing these innovations. It's just that then you get these corporate entities coming along and kind of scooping it all up, and then, and I don't mean to complain, for sure. I definitely am not complaining, because I agree that what we're seeing in the industry is growth, and that's good. I just think that awareness is going to be important. So I know a handful of smaller companies that, because we have our distributors and stuff like that, and I have friends who are tattooers and who own businesses in the industry, and everybody sees the same thing. It's unfortunate to watch the people who have the most passion for the industry kind of getting drowned out by the ones that have zero passion for the industry, and they're all about maximizing income and minimizing their cost, which is, a great business model. as long as you're not a part of the industry and you care about the quality of the product, that you're using.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and that is the differentiating factor. The innovation is still coming from within the industry, so it's kind of separate from the growth. I guess I was just thinking of, it is cool that we've done this as a collective group of outsiders, over the last however many years, that we've grown something big enough that Wall Street might pay attention to it and go like, "Wow, look what these folks did. That's blowing it up." It's funny. I think when it's these corporations buying up tools that we are using, we notice it and we have discussions like this. Another thing that I've noticed is startups or bigger companies who are more consumer facing and not tattooer facing, right? So if I'm sitting here looking, it's funny that you had reached out to me. I've got this contract that was sent over to me from Mad Rabbit Tattoo, who is a company that was on Shark Tank, that is not from the owners are not from the tattoo industry, but they are a tattoo kind of lifestyle brand. Not at this point, not really trying to sell a lot to tattooers, but they're selling a lot of aftercare products, long-term care products, skin products to clients who want their tattoos to look great for years and years. And that might be something I'm not working with them just yet, but that might be something that I don't know if tattooers would have ever focused that much on. Once the tattoo's out the door, we're just like, good luck, do the best you can. So sometimes maybe this innovation, sometimes maybe innovation can come from outsiders, or maybe not. This might just be another one of those things where the industry hit a certain dollar amount, and they're like, hey, this seems like an opportunity to sell lotion. I don't
maybe, and I don't know them specifically, so I wouldn't be able to say, which category they're coming from, and there's not, and I'm definitely not trying to like identify anyone as right or wrong. It's really just a matter of understanding the industry that we're in. Because when I look around at fellow artists, I don't think that they are noticing it necessarily.
Yeah.
Because, the passion is in the tattooing process for us. It's not even necessarily and it is. We want to produce a good tattoo, right?
Yeah.
And what we really want more than anything is to continue to tattoo and to continue to stick needles into people,
Mm-hmm.
So when you're that focused on your, when you love your career so much that your attention is here and not there or there, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And it's not until it disrupts that process. And so this is a common thing, I guess, with tattooers, because we had a podcast not long ago with this guy, Ben Shaw, who's been on all the podcasts and talking a lot about the new MOCRA Act, the modernization of cosmetic regulation, and all of the things that are changing with inks and basically every topical, anything that comes in contact with skin, at all. And they're trying to regulate that, or they are regulating that, I guess, on a federal level. And he's just screaming, from the mountaintops for tattooers to get involved and join the APT and jump on his Discord group, which is free. He's just trying to share information and educate. And talking to him off camera about it, it's just hard to get people to pay attention because they're just dialed in on what they're doing. Now, when they reach for the Dr. Bronner's or whatever that they normally use, or some product that they're used to, and it's no longer allowed, maybe it's too late then, but then that's when they'll pay attention,
Yeah, unfortunate, I guess.
Mm-hmm. But conversations like this do, at least, there's no doubt there are plenty of tattooers who do pay attention. We'll put out this episode and people will have plenty to say about it, and there'll be people, you will see that there are plenty of people who are educated and probably know more about some of the stuff that's happening in the the corporate world than we do.
Yeah, like the ink, it reminds me a little bit of like the ink, or a lot actually, of the ink, all of that stuff that went down specifically in Europe right now.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some people that were also screaming from the mountaintops just to get us all to pay attention, and they were right. We should have paid more attention, and now it's kind of too late, or at least now. who knows what happens. And I like to try to be an optimist, but that has had probably long-standing implications for the industry.
Probably so. And, and a lot of people will think, well, I'll just go back underground. I'll just stop. I'll tattoo out of my house. I'll close my shop down. I'll let my license go. I'll, do whatever. But unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be, as easy to do as people think if they depend on things like social media to bring clients in and, whatever else. One of the big questions, and I was actually just talking to my health department regulator about this last month, they really struggle. They're underfunded. They're understaffed to just do basic inspections of tattoo studios here in Tennessee or in Shelby County where I am. And I brought up this MOCRA Act and how they're going, basically all they're looking for me are my, they'll look and make sure that my cartridges are sterilized and not expire. They'll take a look at my inks and they want to see release forms, and that's about it. And I brought up the idea that he may have to inspect the soaps that I'm using, the aftercare products that I'm using, the tattoo gels I'm using, whatever, whatever I'm dipping the gel out of, the popsicle stick I'm dipping, tongue depressor I'm dipping the gel out with, everything in between. And he's like, I've heard of some of this. There's whispers of this going on. Like, what? Tell me about it. And I told him kind of what I knew. And he went, who are they going to get to do that? I was like, you. He's like, I can't. How am I going to do it? I can't do that. So getting this stuff implemented is going to be an entirely different challenge.
And that is probably another that brings pain to me just thinking about it, because who are we actually talking about? Because it's not the guy that you're talking to about it who is going to make those changes. It ends up going further up the ladder, and bureaucrats of some type, who are gonna ultimately determine what are the protocols and the standards for this industry. Which, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it's good. We're gonna ultimately clean up the industry that has been. When it's unregulated, then you end up with a lot of, bad practice happening. So we don't want that. And then when it's overregulated, I think we're in this infancy stage where it's like they don't really know how to regulate it yet, and so they're probably going to come in heavy-handed and overregulate, and then over time it will all make more sense. But I think, in the beginning it's going to be tough.
Right. Yeah, there'll be a lot of red tape, a lot of hurdles, and one thing that the conversation I had with Ben Shaw on this, and I actually had the same conversation I was telling him with Sean Bellina of S8 probably 10 years ago. He was talking about regulations coming forward, the FDA getting involved in tattooing, and that it was inevitable. And Sean made the point that they would rather not do this. They would rather you guys self-regulate and come up with some standards, build your own testing facilities, have some type of a stamp of approval for your inks or for your whatever, that everyone says, hey, we buy these products that have passed this level of, of certification that we as an industry have decided is appropriate. He's like, they would love for you guys to do it and them not have to spend all the time and resources, and money to make it happen. And of course we didn't. And now they're having to do it. But even now, Ben's like, hey, they would love our input if we would just get enough people together to be a part of it. They don't necessarily want to have to take stabs in the dark or bring people in from outside or build their own library of experts or, whatever.
And I wonder what stops the industry from becoming more, self-regulatory and things like that. I mean, I think there's probably some hesitation. I mean, obviously we're all very busy and interested in doing the job itself, but so would any industry, So I would say maybe it's probably fear-based. Like we're afraid to mess things up or piss people off and this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That probably has a lot to do with it. But we'll see. I do think it's important. Back to our initial kind of point of, or the topic of conversation of paying attention to who we're buying from and who's buying who. There's really not a single, you're not going to open any paper, even trade magazines, anything like that, and find a lot of this stuff. If there were better resources to just say like, hey, what's happening in the industry today? When we started, me, Gabe Ripley, and Lauren Gregory started this thing we were doing for a year or so. Lauren's actually still doing it, and it was called the Tattoo Weekly, and they got me in on it with the idea that it would be like a weekly tattoo news show. What's happening in the industry? What's important in the industry? I was like, man, I can't think of anything more important than that. That sounds fantastic. But the fact is that's really difficult to do. It takes researchers. It takes, checking and verifying that you're actually right and not just spreading rumors. And it turned out to be something that none of us could really put the time into it that it was needed.
I think that it reminds me a little bit of like self mastery, right? So when you're thinking in terms of like self improvement, let's say, it can be a daunting thought to think, okay, well, how do I make all these better choices and start moving in the correct direction, right? And the answer ends up being, well, it's easier to identify what you're doing that is wrong and just stop doing that for starters. And I think maybe that there's something similar to that could be effective, like rather than, because the next step is, it's almost like, okay, let's say we don't like Amazon and how that whole thing works, right? It's $1 trillion guy, what's his name? Bezos has $100 trillion in his wallet at all times, right? And we don't like that. And we would prefer to support, smaller businesses. Shit, I just totally fucking lost my train of thought there for a second.
Well, but it's identifying what you're doing wrong or what you can easily change.
Right. So if we can, I start by identifying like who are these big companies that are now not related to the tattoo industry and who do not have really any interest in us as individual artists other than us spending money on their products, right? Who don't bring really any value to the industry, who don't. So I was going to say, I guess here's my point. So if the step one was, okay, I'm not going to go to Amazon. I'm not going to keep spending all my money on Amazon. So the next step is, well, I still need stuff, right? So that forces me into a situation where I have to start looking into, and I don't know if that's a great solution for somebody who's basically saying, yeah, but I'm trying to just keep busy and it's already hard enough, and here I can just click and I'm done. And now you're asking me to do more work. But if the industry matters enough to you, I think that step one is just stop doing the thing that you think is feeding the beast, and then start to take steps in a new direction. And I think that will force us into the things that you were concerned about, like the researching and having more information and knowledge about the industry.
Right. And it's not that you're necessarily like volunteering to pay more money for the same experience by doing that. Like, for example, when you recognized that the cams were having issues in the first Numa 4, you just went ahead and found the solution and sent them out to everybody. Like, hey, we had something with these weren't working the way that I thought. Here's all the new ones. You should toss those out and use these instead. If you were doing that for you'd sold 500,000 machines, you would probably just ignore it and wait until people brought it up to you, because you're not agile enough to be able to make those moves and those decisions the bigger that you get. So there are sort of some inherent advantages to being smaller and a proprietor like that, and then those same advantages apply to your clients, to your buyers.
It's like back to the customer service thing, and not just customer service, but customer relations, technical, support, stuff like that. Where, like I've heard stories where some machines take people 6-7 months to get back from repairs. That's a testament to a smaller company. A smaller company is not going to make you wait 6-7 months because they're going to have their hand on it, and
Yeah, and you can get to the person that makes the decisions so much easier.
Yeah.
Whereas you may find that there is no one that makes decisions the bigger that the company gets.
Like, think about in the old days, and really quick, I would just say, like, each generation is going to talk about the old days and how their older days were better, and I think that that's inevitable. But some of it we can change, or some of it we can influence, and so it reminds me of, like, back in the day, you could go to like a hardware store, and in some places you can still do this, but and there was like a older dude who owned the hardware store, and his wife and maybe their kids or something like that, and if you went there often enough, you would know them by name, and you might go in looking for like a bolt with a specific type of thread, and they would help you, as soon as you walked in the door. So now compare that to like you go to Home Depot, and nothing against Home Depot employees or anything like that, but these guys don't even want to be there. I'm trying to get them to. I'm just like looking around for somebody in an orange apron, and they're hiding, and they don't want to be bothered. They don't want to do their job. They don't want anything to do with like helping you find a bolt that is specific thread or whatever it is, So you're kind of on your own. You might have a million options, and you might not find it anyway. Or if you do, and then if you have any issues or any problems, it's the same shit. You have to go through these corporate channels. It's completely dry and soulless. And so I get it. I get why these old timers are like, yeah, in my day, shit was better,
In many ways, yeah, from that standpoint, it definitely was. And I look at, my wife and I own quite a few rental properties here in town, and I use small local repair people for almost everything, because I know if I have an issue, if it's really an emergency, I can make a call on a Saturday or a Sunday, whereas if it's a big company, there's no way that I can. And then you look at, on the occasions that we've used bigger companies, they have automations where it's like, hey, the service technician, it texts you, your service technician is on their way to your property right now. Hey, the service technician has just left, the work's completed, here's the invoice. All of that stuff used to be big companies only, and you go like, oh, well, there's the convenience of that, is there's a lot of automation built in. But what's happening, I think now, that really evens the playing field is technologies have evolved and gotten cheap enough that everyone can afford to do that stuff now. I'm constantly pushing my plumbers and electricians and small business people to like, hey man, subscribe to like a scheduling service. Stop doing everything on your cell phone and having to stop in the middle of your job and talk to someone. Hire an answering service and have it automate some of this stuff. So we can really, I think we can kind of have the best of both worlds when it comes to being able to scale a little bit and still remain a proprietor, a small business.
Yeah, and as technology develops, people, myself included, a lot of times I don't necessarily want to call. If I could text or something, not my friends or anything, but like if I can text the service guy or whatever, I think people like the ability to do that. And so, yeah, I agree with.
Yeah, definitely. Well, before we wrap up, tell me what all is happening with Numa. What's been the feedback? I know the macro has been out for a good while now. What kind of feedback have you gotten compared people using the original and the macro? Are you what do you think new?
I mean, it's still similar to what it was. People, and it's hard to know why somebody likes what they like, but from my standpoint, or from my perspective, it looks like people who do color work prefer the macro. People who do more like illustrative stuff usually prefer the macro, and like dot work as well, because it's got a lot of torque in the lower speeds. A lot of people like those kind of people like the macro, and then people who do more realism or black and gray, they prefer the Modus. Something more of like the pendulum thing or the super light touch, generally are leaning more towards the Modus. And so that's actually helpful and informs us so that we know the best way to prescribe, which configuration people would choose. But we also, as time goes on, we try to reduce the configurations as much as possible. And the best way that I've found to do that is just offer more with each sale so that they don't have to sit there and think about it too much. It's more just a matter of choosing a color and choosing a grip size that you think is best for your hand size or your preferences, and then everything else is included. And so you can always kind of like dial it in the way that you like it at that point.
Hey, I'm back. I made it all the way back to Memphis, Tennessee, in the time that you watched that episode from beautiful Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I just put my thumb in the wind and made it back. I'm pretty good with my thumbs. So I want to thank Carson for taking the time. I hope that you got something out of that episode. I'm sure that some of you guys have some opinions on this topic, so I'd love to hear what they are. Feel free to shout them out in the comments Also, something I don't mention all that often, I've been pitching the Inside Fireside Tattoo Club a lot, but if you don't want to spend any money on a tattoo club, you should sign up for our Tattoo Tuesday newsletter. It is kind of an ongoing evergreen newsletter that sends out a tip to you every single Tuesday morning. And it's basically just kind of a repurpose of a lot of the content that we've created over the years. You know, this channel's been around since 2013, and there's so many episodes, so many videos that have kind of gotten buried. And so what we've done is we've gone through and we've pulled little nuggets out from all these episodes over the years, and we shoot you one of those episodes or a piece of one of those episodes, some concepts, some tips, some ideas from those episodes every single Tuesday. So I'll make sure to leave a link where you can sign up for the Tattoo Tuesday newsletter. Thank you guys, as always, for supporting what we do, and I'll see you in the next episode.